Hi, well, welcome. Good morning. My name is Heidi Franklin. I'm with PACT. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for PACT's Talent Connect Roundtable, Thriving in a Post-Pandemic Workplace. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Bentley Systems, Boomi, Signity, Juno Search Partners, SAP, and SEI. I'd like to go over a few housekeeping rules. Attendees, please stay muted. This program is broken down into two 30-minute segments. First, a presentation with the slide deck, followed by an interactive panel. Ask questions, raise your hands, or ask questions in the chat box. We'll be monitoring throughout. The presentation and the panel will go to about 9:35 a.m. After the program, we'll drop a link in the chat to our remote virtual networking room, where you can connect with the speakers and each other face-to-face. With further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presentation, Bridget Abraham and Katie Winger from Cbre. Welcome, Katie and Bridget.
Thanks, Heidi. Good morning, everyone. We're gonna flip over and pull up a deck here. Heidi, do you mind unsharing and I'll pull that deck up? Perfect, thank you. All right, good morning. So my name is Katie Wenger. I'm with Cbre, and I'm joined by my colleague, Bridget Abraham, who's with Cbre as well as a director in project management. So today we're excited to share with you thriving in a post-COVID workplace. And we're gonna really put a lot of focus on the physical space and how that translates across, management and across your employees' experience. So as I mentioned, I'm joined by my colleague this morning, Bridget Abraham, and Cbre. We recently completed a survey, looking at leaders across the globe, thinking about talent, location, occupancy, design, and experiences, and really received some great feedback that we're excited to share with you this morning.
So thank you for that, Katie. So I think what we just wanted to lay out there today was a framework to kind of think through different flexible strategies moving forward. If we've learned anything in the last year and a half, it's really been, we have to plan for change in uncertainty. So really just putting out there certain pillars and deciding, based upon your different, cultural requirements or space requirements or financial requirements, really what levers are going to be the most important to pull. So we've kind of assembled them here today. So really to talk about culture and how the fluid workforce works in a hybrid environment, the enhanced purpose of the physical office, and really the power of design to enhance that office experience. And then really we have a little bit at the end to pivot to how you implement that change, kind of as a teaser towards our interactive discussion in the second half of the program.
So we welcome you to ask any questions in the chat box as we're going through, and we'll be happy to kind of discuss as we go through our deck here this morning. So, through this entire journey of the pandemic in the past year, I think we've all come to a conclusion that the office is really playing an important role, and it will continue to play an important role in the future of the workplace. While before we would go to the physical office to do work, now it's in a new position really as a place to conduct business, and it's more used as a tool and placed as a unique amenity to your employees in this larger ecosystem of their life and their work-life balance. So no longer are we going to our office simply to complete tasks. We're going there to collaborate with our peers and going there for a purpose, really as a destination to do work and conduct business. Something that I think many are concerned about is really the culture and how that translates from both the physical and the virtual environment. So when we recently surveyed many groups of employees, people felt that company culture continues to play an important role and continues to be a challenge in this hybrid environment. Really, that team engagement, managing performance, creating that team culture is something that is, to be seen as we head back into our offices and also have that component of the hybrid environment. And we're excited to talk to you today about some ways that we'll implement, various ways to really continue that culture and have both a tool for your physical office as well as that hybrid environment. So I think throughout this time, we saw really a shift in what the priority of the office is. So as I mentioned, we're no longer going to our office simply to do focus work or answer emails. We can really do that at any place, at any time. But instead, many felt that the office versus at home, there's less ability to collaborate, there's less ability to communicate with your teammates and those outside of your team. Whereas even with this hybrid environment, you're still able to really maintain that work-life balance as well as perform that individual focused work. I think this really translates to talent as well, and growing your talent and retaining that talent. It's key to have that collaborative and that feel and sense of belonging. And without that physical space, that now positions the office as a place to do that and really feel a sense of belonging to your company.
Yeah, so with that, it's really reframed the dialogue around the idea of free address seating. So I know that topic's been out there for a while, but we've really seen a radical rethink across organizations in terms of the value of free address. And really, again, if you don't want to be sitting there paying for assigned unused seats, if you're allowing some level of remote work. So really people are beginning to understand that you can potentially shrink your footprint a little bit, potentially invest in greater we spaces over me spaces. So instead of giving over all this real estate for individual desks, you're really giving different sorts of team rooms, different sorts of postures for having that collaborative, chance encounters, things like that. So you might have some bar height seating, you might have some lounge configurations, you might have formal conference rooms, little two-person huddle rooms, things like that. And really being able to give over your space, again, to create a destination or the office as a destination, and very unique from the type of work that you're able to conduct from home or remotely. So that's the big shift that we've seen, COVID very much accelerate. I think there were a lot of different companies were adopting this pre-COVID, but it's become more the norm than ever. So that's an exciting thing that kind of frames up some of the planning strategies that we're going to get into in a few minutes. So again, I think, free address probably has gotten a lot of bad press out there, just like the idea of the open plan. But again, if it's done in a thoughtful way that is considered, rather than just throwing a bunch of people into an open space without really considering the architecture around it, considering air quality and acoustics and thermal comfort and all of those other kind of ephemeral elements that make a space valuable and comfortable to be in. Yes, that is not great. But if you think about it, you design it well, you take the time to consider the impact on your people, and really that there is a spectrum of different ways that different people are going to want to work, and different ways that you can accommodate that. So we have, a few of them displayed here, but again, from dedicated seats, which might still make sense for different job functions or different personalities, all the way to people who might want to work from home and just pop into the office, once a quarter or something like that. But again, having a planning strategy in place to accommodate all of that, the two extremes, and then everybody in the middle is a pretty important way to think about how to position your physical space in a time of radical uncertainty. And again, there's been a lot of interest in this idea of activity-based work and work from home, which are obviously on the high end of unassigned seating. And just again, you're using the office as a tool for doing business. So if you need to go in to collaborate or meet with your team, or maybe every Wednesday you have a team meeting and you do a brainstorming session and you have like a war room essentially set up where you can leave your pinups and go and write on the wall, and that's kind of dedicated to your project for the duration of 6 months or what have you. That's there, and that's available as a tool, again, to facilitate people doing their best work. All right, and then with that, we pulled together just a few different plans and some imagery just to help illustrate what we mean by some of these topics. So Katie, if you want to go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so I said this before, but again, really prioritizing we space over me space. and just reinforcing the idea of the office as a destination of choice. So if you go next, Katie. Right, we have again kind of bucketed different sorts of job functions into these 4 different typologies. So there's residents, obviously on the far end of the assigned seating spectrum, and then you have connectors and co-creators who might be in the office anywhere from 20 to 60% of the time. So that's where that unassigned seating really becomes valuable, because you know, where you could have 2 dedicated seats, you're able to have 1 dedicated seat that is used all the time rather than 2 dedicated seats that are used part-time. And then nomads who are, you know, kind of at the far end of the work from home, or they travel a lot for business. They might be popping into offices. If you have different footprints all over the country or the globe, they might be popping in around there. So, you know, really thinking about this is not necessarily a one size fits all, but again, planning for flexibility and will allow you to be able to kind of accommodate changes, because, you know, I think if we can expect anything coming out of the past year and a half and into the next year and a half, right? There's probably going to be a lot of change. We're going to get more best practices coming out of this, but for those who need to make a decision or need to make a move or want to pilot something, you know, these are great benchmarks to kind of make decisions around. So go ahead to the next. There we go. So I'm going to show just quickly 3 different planning methodologies again, and each one is a little bit different. And again, they're framed each as a full floor plate, but that's not to say that you couldn't have sections of your plan kind of accommodating all 3. But here, this activity-based work model, this is kind of something that was beginning to gain a lot of traction pre-pandemic, the idea of unassigned seating. You report to a neighborhood so that when you're there, you're able to collaborate with different colleagues on your team or people who have similar job functions, but then it's also supplemented with all the different kinds of breakout and collaboration spaces that you need. So if you do have to have a private phone call, or if you're doing like what we're doing right now, you can pop into a phone room and have that acoustical privacy, but still be part of the office and still be able to run out, grab a cup of coffee. And, you know, like Katie and I could sit and have a cup of coffee in the cafe really quickly, something like that. So the idea here is it's still about 50% workstations, and then with a nice amount of amenities and meeting spaces. And then if you go to the next page, Katie, just to kind of show you what we mean by that. So on the bottom, really the natural light and providing a variety of different spaces to work, all of those design elements really become extra important in this post-pandemic workplace value proposition. So again, really making sure that the space is appealing to draw people in and really be a valuable, or really have, you know, be a valid, I should say, competitor against the ease and comfort of working from home. And then here we have just, you know, focus rooms. That's kind of like a phone booth room where you can go there. You could essentially work there for the day, but again, that's not really the point, because the point is to come into the office to see people and collaborate. But still, you can have offices. So if you need to have a small team meeting, that's available as well. And then, you know, again, like I said before, different postures of seating. So standing height, seated height, adjustable height desks have taken off, even more so, I think, in the post-pandemic dialogue. And if you go to the next one, Katie. Team-based work is a little bit different from activity-based work in that you're giving over even more space to we activities, if you will. So this is the kind of the more standardized approach that I've seen people really gravitating towards in the post-pandemic dialogue. So again, the idea is you still have neighborhoods that you report to with all of the focus rooms and offices and things to support that work. But again, the idea being that, oops,
Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. The idea being that, you know, you're really giving over more spaces to like that collaboration space and having a greater variety in sizes. So 2-person, 4-person, 6-person, formal conference room, technology enabled rooms, you know, library spaces that are no technology, things like that, where you can really go. And again, you really have choice and agency in how you're going to perform your best work and get your best work product in any given day. So again, we have a few more images to just break this up a little bit. So different sorts of huddle rooms and collaboration rooms, plenty of glass, again, so that you feel that you can still be there, you can still have acoustic privacy, but you still feel like you're part of the work environment, and you still feel at one with your organization and your corporate culture and things like that. But then, just a vast new variety of different types of collaboration spaces. So whether that's a big whiteboard room that's open, you can just go and everybody can have a big, pinup space, or, a war room like I spoke of earlier, where that room is dedicated to a team for the duration of a project, and you're able to essentially use that as your touchdown space, and potentially work from home 2-3 days, but you can come in, be with your team when you need to, or leave some notes on the wall, or leave something there, knowing that your colleague's coming in the next day and can use those, and you can continue to move a project forward. And just lab space. And then our last strategy is probably the most radical, and I like to call it, since we're here in Philadelphia today, I like to call this the Fitler Club, the corporate branded Fitler Club. So the idea being that the office is your kind of crown jewel, and the sole purpose of this physical space is to bring people together. So this is no dedicated workstations. You do have a few in the dark green touchdown spaces where you can go, and if you're in between meetings, you can sit and check emails or make a quick call. But really the idea is you are there to potentially to just be with people. So that might be entertaining clients, it might be meeting with your team, it might be hosting an event, but really having everything in place so that you're in that envelope of corporate culture. You still have that brand and that identity to your physical space, but really the heads down work is not meant to be done there. You're really meant to go to be with other people. And again, just a few images. So a work lounge, a nice open reception, the idea really being that you have that kind of hotel lobby hospitality type environment, to really drive connection, collaboration, have that experience driven workplace. And then really, we have the 5 E's here, but again, the idea of that distributed and augmented experience, but again, positioning the office so that it's enticing, you enter, you engage with it, you exit, but that experience is extended. So you do have that cultural connection to the office even when you're not there. And the physical office just takes on an enhanced role in really promoting company culture.
So I think when we think about the design that Bridget kindly shared, and thinking about what are some of the key ways that we can implement this design, and what are the key priorities of our employees when thinking about this, and wellness is really top of mind. I think, throughout this year, safety and wellness has really been at the forefront of a lot of employees' concerns, and when they think about the workplace. So not just siloed into, your safety, but also your social, environmental, physical, intellectual, occupational, all of these, this full, the full complete well-being of an employee is key. And when we're thinking about this, and I know we had spoken a little bit about just using the office as a tool for your employee to conduct business and to really create this seamless way of doing work, and in conjunction with wellness and technology, making sure that this employee feels that throughout their environments, safety and their wellness is top priority. So when thinking about how, the design factors that might make a play into what wellness and keeping our employees well, indoor air quality, which we're just going to touch on, the acoustics, thermal comfort, lighting, the materials that are being used in the environment as well. I know when thinking about sustainability, especially as we think about Gen Z coming into the workforce, that's a key factor that many have top of mind. So thinking about what materials are used within the office space as well. Mindfulness, safety, as we mentioned, even the nourishment and the food that's being, handed to our employees, quality of water, just the social spaces, flexibility, and active design are all really ways that we can take wellness to the next level in the design of our space.
Yeah, and I'll just build upon that a little bit. I think pre-pandemic, we all thought of building amenities as a fitness center and a conference center and a cafe and all of those different things. But now, never as much as it is today has like indoor air quality, thermal comfort, lighting, acoustics, materiality been on the mind of the average person. It's always been on the mind of designers and people in commercial real estate, but there's articles about it all the time. So really having that healthy building where, you have a sense that this building is well taken care of. It's well maintained, it's clean. I have confidence that the air quality is good. There's the MERV filtration in the system. There's fresh air intake, all of that. And I think that those considerations are going to become more and more important in positioning buildings and the attractiveness of different spaces to tenants moving forward.
So I think alongside of that wellness, technology is really key in creating that seamless environment that, it's enticing, we enter it, and it kind of continues through that physical space continues as we leave that physical space. We still have connection to it. So the free address really, it has that heavy emphasis on the desk sharing, which also helps with that cleaning and keeping the workplace itself clean and safe. And we're able, using technology, to really create a more healthy and more well environment. So in this diagram, you can see a few of the items that are possible solutions as we look to the future, where we have, smart buildings that are using technology to keep the temperature where the shades are moving in conjunction with the sun. That's already happening downtown, but we can see even more smart technology come into play. We have more low touch, voice enabled areas of the office, such as the kitchen or sinks, different autonomous cleaning solutions, having that spatial sensory programming where we understand where our employees are spending the most time and understand kind of how they're moving throughout the office. And of course, remote collaboration tools where our employees who are remote are still able to have that connection to the office, and making sure that many of our collaboration spaces are tech enabled. So there's many different factors that, technology can kind of facilitate that more, wellness focused environment, and also make the office experience more of that destination feel and a lot easier for employees as they travel throughout their day and their work day. So looking at some tools that may be able to use. So for example, this is kind of that reservation system. So many companies are adopting almost 50%, this reservation type tech, where it's an app on your phone and you simply, you reserve a room. Cbre is actually using something just like this right now, where we're able to reserve what type of environment we want for the day. So whether it's an enclosed office, a conference room, a workstation out in the open, we're able to make that reservation, understand where our teammates might be sitting for that day. And then, the idea is that everything is really through that tech right in your hand. It's accessible for all, right in the palm of your hand and your employees. So you can order food, you can see what's going on in your office that day. You're able to understand what teammates are in the office that day. And, while that's happening on the back end, we're able to understand what our employees are doing and how they're moving throughout the day, and the distribution, whether, we have more remote workers throughout a week, what days they're coming in more, what types of environments they're looking more specifically to gravitate towards, and really understand and enhance the employee experience through the use of technology.
So again, to just kind of to set us up for our discussion, the big question obviously is how do you implement this? I see some feedback in the chat that's kind of talking about this, and we can definitely circle back and touch upon that. But really the idea being that the driving force behind this should be, what sort of culture do you want to be fostering in your environment, and how can you promote your people to do their best work and have the best outcomes? And then thinking about, how do we create a physical space to support that in supplement to whatever we're going to be doing from a remote work perspective. So really that should be the driving force, not necessarily being, frantic about catching up and and keeping up with the Joneses on what you might hear Facebook or Google are doing, you know, should really be culture driven. And again,
yeah, Bridget.
Oh, go ahead, Katie.
No, it's okay. I was saying that no one size fits all. It's not going to be, you know, a cookie cutter experience for every company. It's really going to be a need for understanding, you know, where you are today and where you want to be in the future, and implementing some strategies that help support that vision and support your people. So thank you all. You know, we'd love to address some of the questions in the chat. I saw quite a few. I think we have a couple minutes to do so. So Bridget and I are happy to kind of look over some of these questions in the chat and talk through it. If you know, want to come off mute for any questions, we're happy to talk through that as well. So, you know.
Yeah, I can address this bottom one first and then work my way up. But I know Matt had a lot of feedback as we've been talking in preparation for today's call about neurodiversity and the DEI question. And again, I think that these sorts of spaces where you are building flexibility into your planning are more uniquely positioned to address that than old style spaces where you had only one type of collaboration space, like a formal conference room, rather than all sorts of different options. So, you know, again, planning for flexibility is also planning for, you know, lighting, colors, things like that, really thinking about those qualities of space and how that does impact people, and not just having a cookie cutter where every single space is you either have a desk or a conference room and that's it. Really, again, having different colors, different textures, different postures of seating or standing, you know, really that's kind of what that is meant to address.
So in terms of this tech question, you know, recommendations for experience apps or telling apps for smaller companies. So Cbre does offer a app called Host, and there's other providers out there as well that may offer something similar. But basically, this app is really great, easy to integrate within your company, and there's different kind of levels to which you can implement it. So, for example, our company really uses it. We do a health check every morning where, you know, you're going through different symptoms, especially in this COVID environment, and then you're really just, everything is right in that app where you're able to access the reservations, what's going on in the company, some updates, you know, and it's kind of one of those scenarios where you can make it and add in as many community events as you would like, and kind of customize it towards your company, and also facilitate your culture as well through that tool, which I think is a great way to, you know, have that physical environment transcend through your employees' lives as you leave the office as well.
Yeah, I would say there's just been a plethora of different companies that have come out with different experience apps. So we can send a little bit of information out about that with this slide deck as a follow-up. But there's plenty out there, and you can make them very simple, or you can make them very integrated and complicated. So just to address your question, Michael.
All right, so we might have time for one more question before we pass it off. Let's see. So I think we touched on a lot about the colors and the lighting and the textures kind of in the environment. And, you know, implementing this, you know, is, I think, let's see, Joel, you had a great question just about how we're implementing this. And I think, you know, in the next panel discussion, we're going to talk, you know, directly about different ways to implement this in conjunction with management strategies and policy, and what that looks like from a lot of our great panelists and their experiences with, of course, Bridget's kind of physical office experience. So we'll address a lot of that in the next section. So Bridget, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add. If not, I can pass it back to Heidi.
Yeah, let's pass it back to Heidi and Vicki.
All right. Well, thank you all. It was great speaking with you, and we look forward to the panel discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie and Bridget. That was wonderful. Next, I'd like to welcome Vicki Sack, co-founder of Juno Search Partners.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. As Heidi said, I am co-founder of Juno Search Partners. We are a search and staffing firm in the Philadelphia area and actually nationally. We also have an RPO division, Juno Talent Solutions, as well as a sister company, Juno Capital, that does some investing in startup companies here in the Philadelphia area as well. And really excited to be here with a really lively group of panelists. We've had a great time preparing for this, and we had a great conversation last week. I wish I could have recorded that and played it for you all, but hopefully we'll be able to recreate that today and talk about some things that everyone's doing in their own companies and seeing some of their clients do to address some of these issues post-COVID. So I'm going to introduce the panel. They're going to say a few words about themselves, their organizations, and then we'll get started with our conversation. So Bridget, would you want to introduce you just finished your slideshow, but maybe you want to just speak a little bit more about your role at Cbre?
Yeah, sure. So I'm sorry that you guys are sick of hearing my voice, but I am actually an architect by background and have been with Cbre for about 3 years. And have really been focused on, especially in the pandemic, the future of work, workplace strategy, and really the value proposition of design in fostering, corporate excellence. So with that, that's enough from me.
Thanks. Marcia?
Sure. Hi, I'm Marcia Neufer. I'm the founder of a company called Blue Shore, focused on leadership development and manager skill building in fast growth companies. Though if you look at my website, it doesn't look like that right now. And I'm the former chief learning officer of McKinsey for 10, 12 years. And so led essentially their internal university.
Thank you. Christy?
Good morning, everyone. Christy Mccann, Flynn here. I am CEO and co-founder of Go Coach, which is an upskilling platform that helps to upskill and reskill all employees, entry level to executive level, and hard and soft skills with our coach marketplace and learning experience platform. Prior to founding Go Coach, I was actually a former 20-year HR executive and worked at companies like Fidelity, Publicis Group, Constant Contact, and Pearson Education.
Thanks so much. And last but not least, Matt.
Hi, thanks. I'm Matt Gustaldo. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer at Exec Online, which is a leading online leadership development product and platform. I've actually only been at Exec Online for about 2 months. Exciting transition. Prior to that, I was the Chief HR Officer at McDermott, Will & Emery. And prior to that, I spent 15 years at CEB Corporate Executive Board pre-Gartner in a variety of HR leadership roles.
Thanks so much. So we really sort of talked about how this past year has been one giant experiment in remote work. And now we're getting ready to embark on another great experiment in how to survive and deal with a post-COVID workplace and dealing with hybrid and remote work and back in the office and a mix of all of that together. And so we sort of lumped it into a couple categories when we talked about it, which was culture and people, some of the logistics regarding schedules and flexibility and policy, technology, and then the actual physical workspace, which Bridget and Katie just spoke to in great detail. It was great information. So I think one of the first things that we started talking about was just generally what the role of the physical office is in your company culture. And how can you use the office to keep that culture going? And so I thought we would start with our conversation around that. So Marcia, do you want to get started?
Sure. And as you know, when we were preparing, I said, in some ways, I think that's the wrong question, because the challenge is really now, and Bridget and Katie talked about it, it's this hybrid experience that transcends anywhere you're working. And so there's that question of what's the role in the office, but it really is about how is that part of an overall architecture of culture everywhere you go. And I gave the example of Electronic Arts, who, at least from afar, I think did a really good job of this during the pandemic. Their mission, day in and day out, is inspire the world to play. And they also had something resembling that as their internal value proposition. And when COVID hit, they changed their employee value proposition to be stay at home, play together, and did a lot to make that stay at home experience as playful as being in the office is, with introduction of game characters, obviously gamification. I mean, just a lot of things that come with the experience in the office. And so I think it's really going to be, how do you do both of those things in a way that feels integrated?
Vicki, I'll jump in a little bit in that, the thinking about the role of the office itself in company culture. And I think one of the things companies should keep in mind is I don't think the office drives the culture. A lot of many other things drive the culture, and that doesn't minimize the importance of the office and the space planning. But I think we're thinking of it in terms of the office reflecting, augmenting, and extending the culture. But we also don't want to skip over the foundational component of understanding what culture is it that you want to build, and what in the current culture do you want to maintain, what do you want to amplify, and also what do you want to get rid of, right? And the office can play a role in doing all of those things, but putting it in the right sequence, I think, is really important when you're figuring out your strategy.
I think we talked a little bit about, it's not enough to be like, oh, but we've got a ping pong table and a beer fridge. And so everybody wants to come to the office. And that's not really what that you used to think about those things as being part of culture, but they really aren't. They're sort of an extension of it.
I loved the definition I saw on entrepreneur.com that said culture is a blend of the values, beliefs, taboos, symbols, rituals, and myths that all companies develop over time, and there's nothing about space in there, right?
Absolutely. So I wanted to just throw out too a little bit about sustaining culture in this hybrid environment. What things are you doing, or are you seeing companies do to keep that culture alive and growing and keeping people engaged when you have some people who are coming in the office more than others, some folks not coming in at all? And what are you seeing companies doing to solve that?
I could jump in. We're working with a lot of companies right now, Go Coach, with this transition, and the best companies are defining that why behind what we're doing, that's attaching to, the values, the competencies, and the behaviors that people want to be able to project, whether they're in the office or not in the office. And I think, looking at that why behind, whatever that plan is and what they're doing and how it attaches to the employees and what's in it for me, it is so integral to, whatever is done here. And looking at the office merely as a tool, I think, is also very important, because you want to be able to see, what those values and behaviors and collaboration points are, what's working, what's not working, and how you can use an office as a tool. So I think that's where I see a lot of the progressive companies, like, steering that component. The ones that aren't as progressive and coming out making statements, where there is no why, and making statements that are negative, where people aren't as productive, you're never going to get people on board. You're never going to be able to change that behavior because you're looking at something from a negative component rather than looking at it as an opportunistic component. So I think it's all about the messaging, and to pretty much sum this up, and really looking at it from a change management perspective.
Christy, I'll jump in just to build on that. And it's in response a bit to a question, I think, from Joel in the chat box during the presentation. And he was asking, what about segments of the population where this kind of work doesn't work? And I think we should have the courage to say that, right? Like we know we have to do something to remain competitive, but it doesn't need to be the tail wagging the dog if there is a very valid reason why a different environment is going to work for that company and for that workforce. You just need to be really explicit in articulating that. And I'm much more concerned about the decisions we make being rooted in sound and thoughtful judgment than I am about any one design that we're going to land on in the end. And I think, the Bridget and Katie, your presentation fully supported that and saying there's no one size fits all here. You just need to be thoughtful in the process.
Do you want to comment, Matt? You used the word to stay competitive, and I think that's right. And a lot of the focus has been on employee value proposition of being able to work, from home and with flexibility. But I also think companies should be thinking about it as a business imperative, not just a employee perk, because there was great research done, and they used the population of women with kids, but that had flexibility during the pandemic. But I think this transcends women with kids, and they found twice as high engagement, 3 times as high enjoyment, and 4 times as high productivity for those women that had the flexibility during the pandemic. So there's a business advantage to this in productivity and engagement, not just our employees want this and we want to keep our employees.
Yeah, and Marcia, I think you just also answered Joel's other question in that chat, which is who pays for all of this? And it has to be running the numbers, that cost benefit analysis, and making some assumptions about what you're going to get back. And it's just like any other business case that you build. And you have to be confident that that business case is there, based on your individual environment. Yeah, Vicky, I'll throw one other thing in here just because I wouldn't want to miss the point. But the original question was, how do you sustain culture? And again, the office, in my mind, reflects and augments and extends your culture. If you're talking about sustaining culture, I'd argue it's the same answer that I've had for 30 years. And that's, what culture you want, you embed it in how you select and develop your leaders, and you empower those leaders to lead. And it's one of the reasons why I was really excited to make the shift to Exec Online 2 months ago, because I think we're on the right thing there. And yeah, you do it in slightly different ways in a dispersed environment, in a hybrid model where there's more emphasis on business transformation skills, leading with empathy, leading with inclusion. And there's more tangible training I think you need to do to say, look, you can't convey on a teleconference anymore through your body language how you feel to a direct report. You have to schedule 15 minutes after that meeting to convey it. There's more diligence involved. But in the same way that I wouldn't want people skipping over the what culture do you want step, the way you sustain culture will always be through your leaders. And the office is then a tool to focus on those aspects of your culture that are harder to do remote, like collaboration. Whereas I'll argue you can still mentor and develop people effectively remotely. Collaboration is really hard, right? And how are you using your office to get after that component?
The one thing that I always,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Marcia.
Christy had a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to play off what Matt is saying, because I think it's really important, is that a lot of the gaps within management and leadership development and skills were the same gaps before the pandemic. Collaboration was an issue, communication was an issue, how I talk to my manager, how I manage down, how I manage across. These were all issues when we were all in the office the majority of the time. These same issues exist. And so you've got to look at the same issues in the different circumstances and how you're able to dive in and really start to embed a lot of that skill development, irregardless of the situation. If you're in the office or you're in the car or you're at home or you're working, a hybrid work schedule, it doesn't matter. Embedding those schools is inherent to what we need to be able to do to move forward. And when we can't say that they're a nice to have anymore, they're a need to have. And when we're empowering people with those skills, it helps them to make better decisions, irregardless if people are in the office or not.
Well, oh, sorry, Vicky.
No, go ahead. You continue.
I mean, you're on a topic I'm passionate about, which is managers, and and let me call it that last mile to the employee, because it all falls apart. Anything you're doing at a company, if that last mile isn't working. And one of the chief people officers I was talking to at a fast growth company said, managers have all of the hard right now and none of the fun. And we talked at the beginning of the pandemic, and we've talked recently, at the beginning of the pandemic, she said, look, all of our sort of support for our managers and the skills they need are around empathy, seeing your employees as individuals, flexibility, caring about the whole person. And the things we were concerned about last month, performance management, delegation, those kinds of things are on a back burner right now. And so, okay, now you come out of COVID and, Christy, you said the things we were working on pre-COVID, and I think that's absolutely right. But I think there's now this additional layer added in of working with your team members as whole people and flexibility to, help them address their needs in a way that works for the company as well. That is a mindset I think those of us in the HR space would have liked to have seen 20 years ago, but it's now an imperative, not a nice to have.
See, that you were leading down the road that I was trying to go, which was the manager piece. And so how are you all seeing companies sort of empower their managers to help drive culture, keep teams engaged? And also there are some companies, we have some clients ourselves that are all of a sudden saying, okay, pandemic over, everybody back in the office September 1st. And some of these employees are saying, whoa, I don't want to go back. And so how are these, primarily the leaders, handling, or how are you hearing them talk about getting people back in the office? Does the office, they have in this mindset, being in the office equals productivity. These were the same probably leaders that back in the day, time in the office meant, dedication to the company. The people who stayed late, those were my high performers, and now people are saying, wait a minute, I have had all this flexibility. I don't want to give it up.
Well, once again, goes to the why behind it. I mean, what a manager wants, the manager gets, and it's about building those skills to the managers. Because if the manager is not comfortable with, managing remotely, they're going to want to have everybody in the office. And again, that's not enough of a why. A manager needs to not only look at it from, the view as to what's going to work for him or her, but what's going to work for their employees and why, and how to be flexible and amendable to that. And I think that, that there's a certain caliber of managers that understand that have, been able to work in a remote environment. When I was at Pearson Education 10 years ago, I was never in the office. I was constantly on a plane. I had 15 different locations. And so I learned very quickly, that I needed to, manage, remotely and virtually, with my global team. And those are skills that, I was able to build along the way, along with, working with coaches and other development, to be able to, do that in a way that was efficient and effective. And so it goes to the manager as to, are they in a growth mindset or are they in a fixed mindset? If they're in a fixed mindset, you're going to lose your talent. That this is the great resignation. You cannot get away with everything that's out there. So I think that, the biggest thing that managers have to be, in tune with is that growth mindset. And once again, empowering them with the tools and the skills and the learning that they need to be able to manage this effectively.
A little bit more building on that in terms of the how. And, Christy, I couldn't agree more with everything that you just said. And I do look to the CRO role, the chief people officer role, one of the four main roles I think I would play in any organization in that role is, the primary consigliere for the entire executive team, right? And that sounding board. And, as you're going through it, I think it's really important that whether you're in a rational conversation or an emotional conversation, right? And the rational conversation, you have to listen because there may be solid reasons there why the answer you have in your head is not the right one. And you need to adapt so that you're landing on the right answer for the business. If you're in the emotional conversation, that goes right back to the relationships you built with that executive and that manager. And do you need to meet emotion with emotion to get where you need to go? Or can you break that down into, a rational argument, Christy, like you just did, right? So, tell me how this is any different than what we've been doing for the last 15 years. But now all of a sudden you think everybody needs to be in the office when we've all been on the road, right? Like those, just understanding where you are, I think is a critical component of getting to the right end.
Great, thank you so much. And so how are you helping clients, or how are you seeing clients implement these change management plans and getting people comfortable with change, and who are they involving in that process?
It's everybody. It's everybody. I mean, that the best plans are the ones that drive the biggest transparency, the communication, and the reinforcement. That's essentially what the ADKAR model is that, I mean, the drive that awareness, the why, to be able to build that desire, that's the what's in it for me. I mean, to be able to build those knowledge and capabilities to do it, and then to be able to reinforce it. And it doesn't stop. You continue to do that. And those change management plans are not just embedded in a hybrid workforce, they're embedded in everything that you do to instill in the culture, like DE&I, like flexibility, like, the different work arrangements that we're in tune to, bringing on new employees, being able to flip the company in a reorganization. It's all about change. And the best change plans, that win are the ones that over communicate and are consistent with attaching that why to what the outcome needs to be and how everybody needs to get there. That's the way, that's a good way to do it. Now, it's also the number one reason why companies fail. The big statistic out there is, why CEOs get fired, and change, lack of being able to embed change management practices is the number one reason. So this is a super critical time for people to stop looking at change management as fluff, but more as a project plan and a people roadmap for where you need to be able to get to the future.
I had one client that said change management isn't like a one-time thing. They've worked to embed change management and change as a constant, normal part of their company. Like, it never ends. And so people are constantly thinking about it. It never goes away. It's not like, okay, we changed, we're done.
Yeah, and the best organizations, right? Yes, there's absolutely a role in down change management agenda constantly. The best companies, though, are driving a lot of that through the front line and the lower levels in the organization, and organizing for them to kind of shape the priorities. And I don't just mean like a town hall, but problem solving sessions with stickies and, what should the priorities be? Because the knowledge of what change is needed is certainly not just at the top, and even more so probably at, quote, the bottom. And I think the best companies are harnessing that to shape their change agenda, not just trying to get people on board with their top-down strategy.
Matt, did you have a comment?
I did, but now I have a different one, just because Marcia prompted a new thought. And I agree, it is top to bottom. I think one of the critical steps, and it all goes into this change management bucket, is survey your people. Get that data. The data may surprise you, right? So we just at Exec Online ran our first return to office strategy survey about 3 weeks ago. And what we saw was, of people who are assigned to an office, and not excluding the people who were hired on a permanently remote basis in the first place, of people who are assigned to an office, only 20% of those people said, I never need to see an office again, right? And we really didn't know where that was going to land, but there is this desire to maintain connectivity, and we're starting to break that down by years of experience. And it's SKUs that you might think of intuitively, but those earlier in their career use the office as a social outlet, right? And want that connection. Whereas, mid-career to senior, you may have kids, you may, life circumstances are different, and you gravitate elsewhere. But just getting that buy-in in the front, and the reaction that we've gotten by saying, thank you for just asking, it goes a long way towards whatever you're going to communicate on the back end. Even though in this topic, by definition, you are going to get wildly differing opinions. So you have to be very careful at the outset to say, and by the way, nothing is going to satisfy everybody. So just know that going in.
If I could throw out, yes, Matt. And if I could go really tactical and throw out something as far from survey as could be, with one of my clients, we held a large scale change event, 100 people at all levels. And we did a structured exercise, very structured to make it work with that group, but essentially people getting out what they saw as the issues, the major priorities, the changes they wanted to see, and stickies. You can imagine what 100 people's stickies look like, and them grouping them into, what are the priorities? And I get that I'm at the ticky-tacky logistical level, but what was so interesting is it wasn't like, as the consultant and the leadership of the company, we didn't go in with some pretty strong hypotheses, and yay, employees came back with them themselves and thought, nothing personal, but thought they invented them. But there were two that we totally missed, that were right, that were big, and so I just want to put that out there as, and there's myriad ways of doing this, but really having employees shape themselves the priorities, as opposed to asking an I from the top digest and do with it what I want.
That's great. Bridget, did you have something to share?
Oh, no, I was just going to second all of that and just reiterate, the power of place and, not, forcing this, giving people that agency and choice and curating their ideal work experience. Like, nobody wants to go back to the idea of commuting every day. It just sounds terrible. But I would just say, as a proof case, Cbre has been doing this unassigned seating methodology as our leases have turned over globally for about the past decade or so. And it pre-pandemic was very resilient as a method. In, people wanted to go to the office because they wanted to see people, they wanted to use these different sorts of spaces. And we were able to, as we expand, it was a constant change feedback loop, right? We would hear from different people, this sort of environment works really well, this one doesn't. We would flex and change and shift. And I think that more than ever, this is our opportunity where, we never would have thought that we would have, a year and a half where we would basically, most people would be completely out of the office, and we have this opportunity to really think through everything that we've talked about for the past hour and really how physical space can change to accommodate that. So I think it's just a really great discussion of how we can use preferences and culture to create that feedback loop, and hopefully continue to do that in the design and physical construction process moving forward.
That leads into, I wanted to touch a little bit before we have to wrap up on the physical space and how people are implementing some of the things that you all talked about on your earlier presentation, which was really, really fascinating, and technology. And one of the things, I think, Matt, you had mentioned this, that when you did a survey and a lot of clients and things, the idea of hoteling was very unpopular. And then we talked a lot about how, you definitely a lot of people want to feel like when they do go to the office, like they have a home and they really like move into their space, and they have a million pictures and their plants and all their little snacks in their drawers and things like that. And so how are you seeing people deal with a workforce that's blended? I mean, obviously it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have a dedicated workspace for someone who comes into the office once a quarter, but how are you seeing people blend that concept together and use space so that people who really want to have a home and come into the office more frequently than others have that space, and then without making the folks that are only coming in, sporadically feel like they're visitors? I don't know if you want to.
So I'll start only because I'll say I'm really anxious to hear everybody else because I have no answer. that's what we're trying to figure out. But Vicki, you mentioned the survey data, and I mentioned 80% of our people said they want to maintain a connection to the office. Of that 80%, the great majority said I only want to come in a couple days a month, and almost everybody said, and please don't make me a hotel, right? And Bridget and Katie, you mentioned it in your presentation that it's not necessarily just personal preference, but we had comments in the survey about neurodiversity and the ways in which people have to work in order to be productive. And for a place like Exec Online, where our mission is to democratize access to the world's best leadership development content, diversity is something we live and breathe. And that also goes to culture, right? If we're not paying attention to that commentary, then we're not living our values. And I do think, Bridget and Katie, your presentation got to it, right? It doesn't mean that hoteling is not the right answer. It just puts more pressure on the space planning component of it. Like, I don't know how you resolve the I want a dedicated space for a couple of days a month, right? Like you can't resolve that unless you're Google or Microsoft, right? And can afford to do so. But that's the crux of it, right? Is how are you thoughtful, but also in a way that's not so granular and specific that you're losing efficiency and scale, and you're setting yourself up for the next evolution that's going to hit, a year or two, if not a month or two down the road. And you have to throw everything up in the air again, because at some level, space is semi-permanent.
Yeah, and I think it's very critical the way that you ask that question, because I think right now, when we've all told to physically distance and be careful about touching things for the past year, of course you say, do you want a hotel? No, I don't think anyone's really going to say, yes, please sign me up for that. So it's really about framing the safety proposition around that, the value proposition that now we have all of these other wonderful amenities where you can come, and you're not really meant to sit at a hotel desk all day. And I think there's a lot of negative connotation around that idea, again, in that you feel like you're in somebody else's space. Whereas if you think back to my chart that I had in the presentation about, the 4 different typologies, right? Residents, co-creators, nomads, and connectors. But if you have a policy whereby, at least you have a clean desk policy, and everyone's assigned, a file drawer or 2 or a locker to kind of keep some of those personal possessions, but you still come in, you see this clean environment. And if you do have one of those neighborhoods that is dedicated to more resident people who come every day, the office still feels cohesive, but you are able, again, to flex in how those different spaces are reserved or the policy around that. So that's my sense on the space angle.
And what about technology? You mentioned some of these apps and things. I'm just being thoughtful to, companies of all sizes and budgets. And so how are you seeing some smaller companies who might not have a big budget to implement some of this fancy technology and touchless this and wireless that? And are there some simple things that smaller organizations can be thinking about?
So I think, again, we hopscotched over that a little bit, just in terms of everybody scrambling to get ready for this giant remote work experiment last March. So I think a lot of companies that might have been desktop PC driven have changed to laptops. And it can be as simple as just having a laptop. You show up, you go to your desk, you have that. You might have a docking station, you might have a keyboard and mouse set up. But it's really not, I think a lot of companies have already made that investment. The touchless technology integrated into buildings, that's a completely different animal. But there are plenty of different apps that are out there. I mean, you can even just use Outlook, which most people already have as a room booking technology. And again, it's implementing that policy, to really leverage what you have in front of you.
We are out of time. So I think I'm going to welcome Heidi back in. Thank you to everyone. And Heidi will transition us to, I think, some networking.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a great conversation, very relevant, of course. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you again to our sponsors, Bentley Systems, Boomi, Signity, Juno Search Partners, SAP, and SEI. As Vicki said,